Coming up on the Broadway Shuffle, is Texas Tech officially a basketball school? We debate next on the Broadway Shuffle. Welcome to episode 69 of the Broadway Shuffle. I am Brennan, joined by Conrad, Clayton, and Zyler, and we've got a great discussion coming up. I'm sure it'll get very heated here today on the Broadway Shuffle. Basketball versus football conversation. Should Texas Tech treat its basketball program as the top program in the school? We'll get into that next. But first, if this is your first time here, or if you are a regular shuffler but have yet to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, please hit that subscribe button and like this video so you never miss an episode. Each subscriber helps this channel get bigger and bigger, so we appreciate you checking out the show. And shout out to our subscriber of the week, David Hutchins. We appreciate you listening to every episode. It's great to hear people shout us out in grocery stores like David did. So thank you, David, and we appreciate you checking out the show. So, gentlemen, I know we're off a devastating loss in the Elite Eight to Florida, but the last couple of days, it's kind of got me thinking, and I know we've kind of had this discussion off air before, but wanted to bring it to our listeners and let them as well debate. Is Texas Tech officially a basketball school? And if so, should we treat the program as such? And so to kick this off, I wanted to get into a couple little, facts that make Texas Tech basketball so successful and why I personally think that this program is probably a top 10 to 15 program in the country. Just right away, 4 Sweet 16s and 3 Elite Eights since 2018. You're in the same conversation as Gonzaga with 6, Alabama with 4, Houston with 6, same ballpark as Duke, North Carolina, Baylor, Kentucky, Michigan State, and Kansas. If you put those schools together, what do you've got? You've got a lot of blue bloods, Clayton. So first stop there, immediately put you in the conversation with some of those schools. Your thoughts on what that means for Texas Tech basketball, and really what it means for your program, even being in the same breath as some of those schools.
Yeah, I feel like that hints at the answer that we're talking about, that it might be a basketball school if the way you determine that is like which program would be easier to win at, basketball or football. I feel like the answer is obviously basketball there. And it's honestly crazy that we're in this discussion, considering I feel like our program hit rock bottom in the middle of this time period that we're looking at after the whole Mark Adams thing. So it's cool to see, like you mentioned, like Gonzaga, Duke, UNC, Kentucky, like all these schools are like the best of the best basketball schools. So to even be in that same ballpark, I feel like if we could just win a title, it would really stamp us and like put us actually in that group.
Yeah, I feel like you would be treated in the same conversation like Baylor is. If Scott Drew didn't win a title in 2021, I feel like your programs are looked at very, very similarly. And the conversation about Drew, if you remember back in the 2015, 2016, it was always, is Scott Drew an elite coach? That was the big thing that was always going around. And it's like ever since he won a title, that's kind of been put to bed. But they've truly been pretty terrible in the tournament ever since then. They really, and to their credit, their 2 best teams were in 2020 and 2021, so they didn't really get a chance to do it in 20 because that tournament got canceled. But you should be right up there in consideration with those programs. Now, like you said, not having a title, I think, really holds you back a little bit. But man, since 2018, I know that's not a super long period of time, but that's 7 seasons, almost a decade worth. I was still in college when that was happening, and I don't know. I think those are really good points.
Well, and you're also top 10 in tournament wins during that margin. If you take this back even into your conference, you're talking about some of these blue bloods. Michigan State, you beat in the Final Four. Gonzaga, you beat in the Elite Eight. Duke, you took wire to the wire in the Sweet 16. And then obviously Houston, Baylor, you see them in your conference, and you've taken care of them in conference. So you are competing and beating some of the top programs historically, even in the last 20, 25 years that have had success in March. I know Gonzaga and Michigan State have not. Gonzaga hasn't won a title. Michigan State hasn't won in 25 years, but 7 Final Fours for Tom Izzo on Michigan State during that span. You knocked them out. And then obviously, Kentucky and Baylor and UNC and Duke, these are schools that are regularly playing for championships. And you're in the same breath as them. I just feel like, I understand, Conrad, and I want to go to you because you're kind of the football guru on the show, but obviously in Texas, football comes first. But should Texas Tech, after this run and what type of players are even getting into the program, start maybe rethinking as we get into the revenue sharing era? Maybe we might want to give a little more to basketball, or is that a non-starter conversation for Texas Tech, knowing that football is a big priority in the state of Texas?
Well, I don't think you can dispute the success that basketball has had and the upward swing that this program has had really since Tubby got here after a largely forgetful history, minus a couple of years that we had in basketball. But thinking about what we've done has been really, really impressive. And I'm not trying to downplay that at all by my answer, but I think Texas Tech will be and always has been a football school if you measure it by fan interest, right? If you measure it that way, that's obviously going to be the football. Football is going to be king. It makes the most money. It gets the most people there. That's just how it is in Texas. Thinking about a school like Duke. I mean, they've got a football team as well, but they don't have quite the same intrigue that we do here in Texas because football is a way of life in Texas. And so seeing that and considering that, I just think we're always going to be a football school. There's always going to be more interest there, but the basketball school should be, it's not an either or, it's a both and at Texas Tech. And even though more fans, I think, do care about football, I still think basketball is a huge part of the identity of the school. And it's only looking like it's going to be that now and for many, many years to come. So I really will be on the football side of things because I don't necessarily see Texas Tech basketball reaching the same intrigue and interest that Texas Tech football does, but I'm happy to be told I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, Zine, I guess that's kind of the question that I really want to ask tonight. It's like your football team and your football program, and I know this is going to sound a little crazy after you just, spent the bank and the portal and brought in, and built a new facility and built a new south end zone and all that, which is great. And you are investing now into your program more than you have. But like, in terms of on-field production and wins, you have not sniffed a Big 12 championship where basketball has. And you have not sniffed a national championship where basketball has. And I get, you look at these schools we mentioned, like North Carolina, they still have a fairly, productive football team. They obviously just hired Bill Belichick. They had Drake May, the number 3 overall pick a couple years ago. But if you ask a North Carolina fan, do you care about football or basketball more? Like, what's more important to the school? It's clearly basketball. And I guess my question is like, is Texas Tech, as always being a little brother in football, is not ever, getting close? Should we kind of be like, hey, football's great. Like, I'd love to see us win 9-10 games, but like, we are here for January to March. Or is it like, that's just never going to happen at this university or Texas? Is it too much to say that would get there?
I don't know. I think about programs that have had similar success to you in this geographic area. And funnily enough, I go back to Baylor. If you asked, and so from an outside looking in, we don't have any ties to that program. If you asked a Baylor fan or you thought about Baylor, do you think about them being a football school or a basketball school? What comes to mind? Okay. And see, in my mind, I still think football. I kind of feel football too.
Really? I think football.
I think,
even though
because it's simply because you're in Texas. Like, people in Texas just do not care about basketball even close to the same level as football on the high school level, on the college level,
but I would
or
disagree because I think you got two people on this podcast, quite frankly. I think Clayton, I would say you probably care more about basketball.
I'm talking about the majority. I'm talking about the majority.
You said people in Texas, and you got one guy right here in front of you that's, a basketball guy, and you probably
I know I do, but I'm not talking about people on the show. I'm talking about people in Texas.
Yeah, and I get that. But, Z, continue with your Baylor thought, but I personally think Baylor, because they won a national championship. When you tell me Baylor, I think Scott Drew. I know, some people might think Art Briles and that era, but I personally go to basketball when I think Baylor.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, and I think that's right where you would be. Now, I think you're way closer to that line than almost any other Texas school. Like, TCU is not there. Houston. I guess maybe Houston.
Oh yeah,
but like Texas is not there. A&M's not. It's not even a question. I think the question is relevant here. I think if you, the way I would think about it is, and I don't know that this is necessarily fair. I think a better proxy is like if you could guarantee a top 20 team in this sport year in and year out, which sport would people choose? Because if you have a choice for a title, you have to take football every time. Just what that would do for your team and your university. And I still think a majority of people would pick football, but I think it would be like 58-42. Like, I think it would be relatively closer. And you've been so much more successful in basketball. You really have.
And that's what the question is, Clay. It's like, is the success in basketball and that doesn't look like it's stopping. Like what Grant McCaslin looks like he's able to do just in 2 years, player development, player retention, keeping guy, and who knows what will happen with D5 and Toppin, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I mean, like, you keep winning, you're going to keep winning guys like me over, going like, man, football stings a little bit going 8-5 and being at games, but man, watching your team go to the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight and, playing for championships is a lot more rewarding. And so I kind of enjoy seeing the basketball team go 28-8 than the football team go 8-5.
Yeah, for sure. I also think it's really hard to get to a point where the fan base cares about basketball more than football. Like I think if that's the criteria, then there's a lot of schools that would fall under a football category who have even had more success than Tech. Like if you think about like Oklahoma State has national titles in basketball. No one would say that they're a basketball school. Florida won back to back. Yeah, Louisville. So it's if the criteria for being a basketball or football school is fan interest, then I think that sways it towards football. But I don't know. For me, I feel like it really is like what is easier to win at that school.
That's got to be basketball.
It's got to be basketball.
Yeah, it's for sure basketball.
It's so hard to win in football. It's also so hard to be as bad as you've been in football for like the last 15 years. Unbelievably hard.
I think, Conrad, that's my point. Like if you're Texas Tech, like you have not, when Texas and OU were in the conference, you outside of 1 year, you didn't sniff a Big 12 championship. And it's been that way pretty much even when Leach was there. You had 1 year really where you sniffed one. So it's, for me, it's kind of hard. Like I know we want to be, but we haven't been. And every time you've gotten close, even we were all there for Colorado this year. You win that game, you got a chance. You don't come through. And so it's just, it's getting harder for me to kind of accept like, should we keep buying into this thing? Like it's going to turn around, or should we accept the fact that like we've got other sports? Look at baseball. I know they're struggling this year, but College World Series, I know track's different, but like national champion, like you're winning in other areas across your academic and athlete programs. Football has just kind of lacked behind recently.
Yeah, I mean, since 2010, your baseball program has been miles ahead of your football program.
Yeah,
like miles.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but 2 points. Number one, it's way easier to win at basketball, no matter what school you're at, because you have 5 guys on the floor at one time. Or football, you have 11 guys on offense. You've got 11 guys on defense. You've got more players rotating in. Much harder to put together a winning program on the football field than it is on the basketball court, just statistically because of the amount of players you have. Now, also at Texas Tech, the football program didn't receive any type of investment compared to what other schools in the state of Texas did in even the Leach era or post Leach. You didn't have an indoor practice facility.
Especially the Cliff era.
Especially the Cliff. You didn't have an indoor practice facility until Cliff's last year. I get it. Cliff Kingsbury is not the most personable man in the world, but he's a fantastic football coach and offensive play caller. And he had to go into living rooms and say, "Hey, come to Lubbock, Texas, where we don't even have an indoor football facility," and say, "Yeah, come play for me." It's like, no, I'm going to go somewhere else. Like that's a big deal in terms of facilities that you have to develop. It's the football program did not even receive close to what the basketball program got, and the USA being built in the mid 90s, all of that being taken place. So I don't think there was enough investment into the football program to really give us the shot that we needed to be a what Baylor was in the mid 2010s, or even what TCU was even when they went to the national championship, because you just didn't have the investment. Now, thankfully, that's changed and that's different, and now we'll see what that happens there. But if you're going to ask, well, is Texas Tech a football school or a basketball school? Well, I mean, I think the answer lies in the money, and the donors obviously think that, not that basketball is not important, because they did get a new practice facility that is beautiful and amazing. But at the same time, when it comes to football, you got a brand new training facility, you got a brand new south end zone, rumblings of maybe more renovations to the stadium. I mean, I think it's clearly you want to be both. You want to have both succeed, but I think it's clear where the preference lies in terms of Texas Tech fans and Texas Tech, maybe even administration. I don't know.
Well, and those are great points, Conrad. But to the point on the investment, I mean, the Wamble facility was built way before the new south end zone, and you see basketball go to the Elite Eight Final Four, and you're like, let's put it up. And you kind of it did seem kind of like the athletic program did invest into basketball heavily before it invested in the renovations on the football side due to the success. And I think now in this era, obviously with Cody Campbell and Womble and NIL and stuff, they're obviously putting more into that program, which is great. And I want football to succeed. I would love to celebrate a Big 12 football championship, but it is kind of an interesting discussion now, seeing that the more you succeed, the more investment you want to put forth in that program. It hasn't even been close in terms of success. And I do think that. And now as we get into the revenue sharing era, and I know Kirby Hocutt has come out and said like what that will look like. My question really is like, well, should you get, like, if Toppin wants to come back, let's say, but he gets a late first round grade. Do you fork up $2.5 million for Toppin? Like, is that worth it? Do you take away some revenue share from maybe a defensive lineman to give it to JT Toppin to play? If that scenario were to happen, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of, it's an interesting thing to think about.
And you bring up a lot of interesting angles about this. I wonder, and I think the most interesting way to think about this and I guess it depends. You'd have to survey a bunch of different time periods, but somebody that's followed sports over the last 10 years and they're from the Northeast or they're from the Northwest or the South, somebody that's not in Texas, doesn't really follow tech sports of the Big 12. If they hear Texas Tech, what sport do they think of? Do you think of the football program or do you think of the basketball program? And that's, I don't know. That'd be kind of my area, because it's not necessarily about fan passion, because I think there will always be more towards football. Like Conrad said, in Texas, it's just a money generator. It's a community event. They're just such huge economic drivers. It's way different than basketball in that sense. It brings in way more money, other items like that. But if a random person, if you ask Scott Van Pelt, Texas Tech, what's the first thing he thinks of? Is it Tech basketball? Is it Tech football? Where is that? And I think your association would kind of go a long way in determining that. And I think a lot of people would think of your basketball program before they would think of your football program, because outside of Pat Mahomes, you haven't given the national audience much to think about in a long time. The last time you were ranked in the AP poll was like 2018. It's been a really long time since you were nationally relevant.
Clay, outside of two names, if you weren't going to say basketball, you'd either think Mike Leach or Patrick Mahomes, but you wouldn't think Texas Tech football per se. Would you agree?
As like a random fan?
Yeah, like they'd probably think of the two big names, but not necessarily the football program. Like if they were going program wise, they would probably go Tech basketball. What do you think? I mean, if I told you like, hey, when I tell you Texas Tech, Clay, you're a Lubbock kid, you went to the school, you might have deeper memories, but right now, what's fresh on your mind? Like for me, it's basketball.
Yeah, for sure, basketball. Now, I do think that like growing up, I always thought of Tech as a football school.
Yeah,
and that's probably because we had Mike Leach. But I don't know. I do feel like there is an argument for like the average just random fan would think of the football program first, just because of like we're in the South and we haven't been good, but like I feel like we're relevant enough in the football to like stay on people's minds. But I do think that's swaying. Like if you continued this success in basketball for like another 3 to 5 years and your football team continued the trajectory that they've been on, I think more people's opinions would sway nationally towards basketball. But I don't know.
Yeah.
And the other argument I say, and it's not even really a thing, but you think about the Southeastern Conference, I say Auburn basketball since 2018, if that's the metric they're using, they've been insane since 2018. I still think of them as a football school. Like, and I know that's the SEC. It's not necessarily apples to apples, but they've had, arguably more success than you. They're the 1 seed all the time. Like, still, that's always going to be a football school to me.
Yeah,
Tennessee was bad in football for a long time and have been very good in basketball, but they have one good football year, and I feel like it's football school without a question.
And I realize that's not apples to apples, because it is like the deep Southeast, and that's
I agree.
At a college level is different.
And to Conrad's point, I mean, football is a bigger sport than basketball, like especially in the South and naturally. And so, but what I'm kind of saying is, if you take that into a more niche conversation of like, there's football schools there, though, like North Carolina. And you mentioned the Northeast. It might be a little more different, but Michigan State, I know Duke is a smaller school, but like they have football programs and they've been relevant. Duke played for an ACC championship not too long ago. So did North Carolina. Like their football teams have been good. You mentioned Auburn. But they're, they start pushing more towards basketball. And I'm just kind of wondering, as Texas Tech, like, should we push a little more towards, not neglect football? We're obviously not doing that, but like, push a little more towards basketball.
And I think it will be an interesting conversation if revenue sharing actually plays out the way that it's supposed to, which it won't. That is, there's going to be under the table money. Like, we're not just going to invest $3.5 million in our basketball program. That's just not going to happen. That's not market rate. That's just not going to happen. But let's say it were, and everybody did just have $20 million. I think your conversations about allocation would become really interesting.
Yeah.
If it was everybody's playing with a limited pot, would our fans be content saying we will invest at a market average rate at $3.5 million a year, and that's all that we'll do? I think there would be a lot of people that would be frustrated with that, where TCU would not have that same problem. Oklahoma State would not have that problem. Kansas State would not have that problem. I think you would have issues with that. And so I think there is some credence to what Brennan's saying.
Yeah.
No,
I feel like the perfect sorry,
Go ahead,
Connor,
Clayton.
real quick. The perfect comparison for a school, if it wasn't for the conference, would be Arkansas. Like, they have been terrible in football, and their basketball program has been really good. And what do you guys think of them whenever you think of them?
I think of them as a basketball school, but
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, go ahead, Z.
How many Big 12 programs do you think of as basketball schools? I think of
Kansas,
Houston, Kansas,
Houston,
or basketball schools, not basketball programs.
Yeah.
I think of 4.
Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I said Baylor. I think Baylor too. So that's 4 right there.
I think BYU. I don't think BYU. I think BYU basketball, but that's just me.
So there are multiple schools in the Big 12 that you think, basketball.
Iowa State.
Iowa State, I think basketball.
But it just depends.
I guess I do think more than in basketball. Maybe.
I think Iowa State football, but maybe that's just because we've suffered so much at their, when we played them. It's hard because it's how do you measure it, right? Is it success? Well, obviously it's basketball. If it's what do people care about, it's obviously, I think it's obvious that it's football because we're in Texas. But I do think that there is a space where you can have the best of both worlds. And right now, at least in this academic year, what since we started the show, having football have a fantastic year by our standards, and then have basketball have a year that we've had several times before, I think is the best of both worlds for us. I don't think you necessarily have to pick and choose between the two. I guess I'm just really biased to 60,000 fans at Jones AT&T screaming their heads off as we play and try and win versus the USA. And not saying that either one or the other is a better environment. I think you ask the average Texas Tech fan, the average Texas Tech student, they're going to think, yeah, it's football, even with the success in basketball. So that'd be my perspective.
Yeah, and let us know. Like, I want people in the comments to let us know, and this is what that's supposed to be. But I don't know, dude. I mean, you look at the USA rocking 16,000 deep.
The younger crowd, I think, would skew more toward basketball as opposed to the older crowd who's seen some success.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned this on last show, but like when Fran Fraschilla, who covers the Big 12, is in the USA, saying, I don't know why you wouldn't want to come play here. This is the best, most raucous crowd we've been to all year. And he goes to, arenas. He was in the Fog, in Kansas. He's been everywhere. And he's been in Houston, the Fertitta Center. And it's like, it's not even close to Lubbock. And when you build something like that, and on top of that, you've added one of the best practice facilities across the street in the Dusty Womble Center, you're telling players, like, this is a pinnacle place. This is a top 15 program, I'd argue, in the country to come play basketball. When you have that, you look more like a basketball school. And the Big 12 too, to help to kind of add to that, to Zyler's point, is you're playing in, I know the SEC was great this year and historically great, but for the last 7 years, you've played in the most dominant and deep basketball conference in the country, bar none. And you've competed for championships in that conference, and you've stayed stable through 3 different coaches. And that is a program builder, not just an off-brand year. And so to me, you put all that together, that looks more to me like, your basketball program has been carrying your athletic department more so than your football program.
I think it's totally fair.
That's fair.
Can you imagine? I was just thinking about this. Like, can you imagine being a Utah fan or an Oklahoma State fan these last 2 years? Like, we're thinking about, like, oh man, dude, 8-5, so disappointing. And this basketball scene, it's like Utah was so bad in football this year, so bad in basketball. Oklahoma State. It's like, I am thankful that we get to have these conversations, and glad that we have donors that make this possible.
For sure. And Conrad, none of this is to discredit the football program. It's just a fact that there's not been success on the football field.
No, but there also hasn't been investment in the football program. So I don't know that it's an apples to apples conversation.
But I would
either.
also say there was the locker room and the facilities when Tubby Smith and Beard were there were some of the worst in the Big 12.
That's also
Yeah.
fair, but it's also a lot easier to win on the basketball court as well. 5 guys versus 22. I mean,
I feel
it's
like
just-
that argument,
I don't like
it's
that
easier to
argument.
put
Yeah.
one team together, but I feel like it's harder to sustain basketball success year over year.
Because you can't
Sure,
bring anybody
that's-
back.
Yeah.
that's also fair.
And-
I'm just saying 5 guys versus 22 is a lot, and that's at the bare minimum.
But
That's
also,
just, that's just a lot.
But
I
there's
would
more
also
players
say-
available, and players can't go pro until after their junior year in football.
Yeah, that's true, but you also can't bring in, or you used to not be able to bring in transfers that could play right away. They used to have to sit out a year, even unless they were a grad transfer. So still, that player replacement was still difficult.
Yeah. And there's so many more things you have to do to be a successful football program. But I would say relative to our peers in the Big 12, we spent less in basketball than we did in football. Even if total investment in football was underwhelming in both, it was way more underwhelming in basketball. Like way
That's
more.
totally fair.
well, and I think too, if you look at March Madness compared to now with the football, winning a championship in football, like you look at Arizona State, came out of nowhere, wins a Big 12 championship, and it takes Texas to the brink, in a college football playoff game. But like, is Arizona State really going to beat Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama in a succession to win? Probably not. But they did get to a quarterfinal fairly easily, in football. Basketball, as we saw in March, like winning 6 games in March is probably the hardest thing to do in sports. Like to win, you saw in Florida what has to go right to win a national championship in basketball, unless you're just UConn or maybe Duke this year.
Yeah.
And you're that dominant, beating people by 20 plus points. I don't know. It might be easier to get to the Final Four maybe in basketball than it would be to get to the Final Four in football. But I don't know. Like, can I ever imagine Texas Tech in the semifinals college football playoff against Ohio State and winning that game? Like, no, I can't picture that. I just can't, right now. But like, could I picture us beating Florida and then go and beat Auburn on Saturday in San Antonio? Like, yeah, I could. I thought that was going to happen. I was 2 minutes and 30 seconds away from that happening. So it's a little. It's tough for me to get knowing that the peak in football is probably a Big 12 championship. That's probably your pinnacle.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and this is actually a really good segue. We're going to do tech trivia right now. There are only 3 Big 12 programs, if you don't count West Virginia, who have never won a Big 12 championship. Do you gentlemen know who those 3 programs are?
In
Definitely
basketball or
Tech.
football?
Football.
Oh, yeah, Tech.
Is this
Tech has to be one.
I mean, are you
Is this
kind of
all
It doesn't
schools?
include
Is this
any
all
of the
schools?
newcomers. It
Okay.
doesn't include like the UCF Cincinnati's or the BYU's, Arizona's. Doesn't include any of those.
So does it include like Colorado,
Does
or
it-
was it the OG 10, like the before
The-
the like the 10
Yeah,
before
so
the
somebody that's
expansion?
played here
Yeah.
from 2010 on. And that's really not that many teams
I was
that's
gonna say
left
that's
over.
not that many teams because I was
Yeah.
at Houston. They haven't been here since 2010. I'm trying to.
Nope.
Oh, Iowa State
That is one.
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
Kansas.
They could have won this year.
Correct.
Yeah, Iowa
Yeah.
State,
Correct.
Kansas.
Those are the 3 teams.
Nice, Clay.
And I think you're one of the only teams that's never played in a Big 12 title because Iowa State's been there. And I think Kansas got to play. Who got to play in 2008 from the north?
Missouri. It was Missouri and Oklahoma.
Missouri, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And see,
Pretty
I mean,
embarrassing.
that's a great, and that's kind of what I'm saying, Connor. Like, it is
Mhm.
embarrassing. Like, we act like as fans, like that we are a program that should be in the same conversation as Texas and OU, and we want to beat those teams and we want to play, but like you haven't done it.
So what are you more of? Say you got to the Big 12 championship game, and we're up by, let's just say 10 against, I don't know.
BYU.
Let's take Baylor for
Let's take
example.
the Storm and Mormons.
Let's take Baylor for example.
Okay.
Dear God.
Say you're up 10 with, let's say it's 2 minutes 47 seconds, and you lose that Big 12 championship football game. Or you're what we were against Florida on Saturday, and you lose that game. What are you more upset about? What would the fan base be more upset about?
The pain
The Big
that
12
I
Let's
championship.
say basketball.
Yeah,
okay, so you said
No.
basketball. The pain that I felt, the pain that I was in Minneapolis, the pain I felt in US Bank Stadium when you were up 68-65 and losing overtime was worse than my parents' divorce. Okay. I literally would pick that
that's awful, man.
over anything. Like that winning a national title or a Big
Yeah.
12
Yeah, but
championship.
that's not
being
what
that-
the question was.
Well, okay, but you're saying I'm saying the pain. It would be more painful for me losing in basketball.
You losing to
I agree.
Florida in the Elite Eight is more
Are you
painful
asking-
than losing to.
You-
I'm asking what's more painful, losing to Florida in the Elite Eight like we did on Saturday, or losing that Big 12 championship game in football scenario that I answered. I think it's by far and away the Big 12 championship in football. By far, I don't even think it's close.
I'm still going to say the Elite Eight.
Yeah. I'm on
That's
basketball
like
as
so
well.
recency bias. It's not
No,
even
no,
funny.
it's not because you were.
Can I change the team
It's also
in the championship?
it's also
Can
because
it be like-
Sure, I
West
would
Virginia-
have the same answer. I'd have the same answer. If you're up
I think
with
I'd
2
pick
minutes,
football. I think I'd pick football.
dude. Yeah,
See,
It's not
my
even
thing
close.
is
But you're so
also
close to a
once UT and
championship
OU,
there.
yeah,
But
And
if
also
you win the Big 12
once-
championship, you get into the playoff.
and then you lose. Then you lose. Then
I mean, it depends. Are you a top four? Do you get a bye? Who do you play? Like, what do the rosters look like that year? Like,
Dude,
I mean,
look,
I mean,
I am
you,
not.
you would get the SMU treatment. You get
You would
pounded by
definitely
like the
get SMU
third place
treatment.
Big Ten team.
Clay, what were you saying? Or sorry.
I mean, if this was like playing Texas or OU when they were in the conference, I'd maybe side towards football. But now, I mean, as much as we don't want to say this, now that they're not in the conference, it's like, does winning the Big 12, that to me, that does not hold as much weight as making a Final Four.
That's fair. That's totally.
I think
fair.
it's actually a really compelling argument. And I think it's pretty close.
Yeah,
it,
and that's
it's
like,
fair. I
Think
just
about this, guys. Conrad, the biggest game we went to last year when we were doing our reunion and going to games, it was Colorado. Like that, it's like, when did you ever care about Colorado in football before Texas and OU disappeared? You know, it's like there wasn't there's not a big rival that, like, I know TCU and Baylor, and they spanked you, last year. So it's kind of like
Baylor did. TCU
Baylor spanked you.
a
Right,
freshman
yeah.
quarterback fumbled the game away, but that's
TCU
another
cheated
conversation.
and Baylor had our signs.
Yes, right. Z, good, great points. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like the Elite Eight loss, because then you're on the precipice of winning a national title. You're 2 games
Yeah, but
away.
you still got to go beat Auburn, and then you got to go beat Houston or Duke. I mean,
That Auburn team-
I'm saying it's pretty slim.
Auburn does not move me.
Yeah, I think Florida will beat Auburn.
I'm
think
not
so,
saying
too.
that Florida won't beat Auburn. I'm just saying you got. So you're telling me that you could. I mean, beating 3 1 seeds back to back to back. I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying I'd take the Big 12 football championship every single day. I know it doesn't hold as much, maybe as much weight as it once did because of Texas and OU leaving, but I still don't think that nullifies it and what that means for a school.
Look, I used to say this a couple years ago, that you would trade 8 and 4 in football every year for maybe the 2019 basketball championship. Like, there are fans, probably Conrad, that would trade 8 and 4 every year with some good games, and say, "Oh, I don't need the 2019 basketball championship."
That's
And
not
I mean,
true
that's
at all.
literally what Mike Leach did.
That's
and
what Mike
people
Leach
call
did.
him a god.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so
I'm-
that's what Texas Tech.
Yeah,
That
but
was
that's
our
not
standard.
going to happen every year.
But that was
Like, there's a chance that we don't.
But that did happen.
That did happen. That
That
was
was-
No, I know, but
Mike
I'm
Leach
saying
did.
no. I know it did, but I'm not saying I wouldn't trade a national championship appearance for an 8 and 4 football season, a national championship appearance in basketball. But
Well,
there's no
fans that-
guarantee.
There's people that would, for sure.
Okay, I guess
That's back
Okay,
in your
there was a
argument.
time,
I'm
though-
giving you an ammunition, Conrad, on the
Like-
football side.
2014 through like 2021, I think I would have considered it because your football program was so stinky. It was like, can we please win 8 games? Like, just somehow, some way. It was
The
so
only
depressing.
reason the football program was even like palatable then was because we had such a good offense. Like, at least
Oh
the
my
games were
gosh.
entertaining.
Can you imagine if we had like just not Pat?
Yeah,
Like how bad you would have been? I mean, you would have been the worst Power 5 program in the country, without a doubt.
and that's what's so and that's what I know we'd love to. Maybe we should do an episode on this, but how Texas Tech became, I mean, really one of the worst. I mean, really one of the worst. If you, I guess it's hard to consider without the offense, but an underachieving, underwhelming football program for what it could have been, right? Like I get the arguments with where Lubbock is and stuff like that, but how that happened, that's I think that's an interesting story that maybe we should talk about more, because that's the amount of hate that we all had to endure from people from other schools because of how irrelevant our football program was, and now we're not, but that's a lot of hate that we've had to do. So maybe we need to talk that out here on the Broadway Shuffle.
Yeah, I think that's a great episode. We should definitely do that. But hey, we wanted to have this conversation because we wanted to leave it to the viewers and people in the comments. Let us know what you think. We shared some of our thoughts, and we'll continue to have this discussion, especially as transfer portal stuff gets into. And Z, I want to get to some transfer portal updates and where the basketball roster does go from here. But before I do that, I want to thank the sponsor of this episode, Watkins Insurance Group. Watkins has the experience and tenure of a nationally owned agency with the personal touch of a local neighborhood firm. And that's the difference of working with Watkins Insurance Group, where your success is always the priority. So thank you, Watkins Insurance, for sponsoring this episode, and we appreciate you. So Z, get us to some of the portal updates. We've talked a lot of basketball, but you're now in that window where you're transitioning into, you got to rebuild this roster. You're hopeful maybe that D5 and Toppin will want to come back and play, see what you can work out there, but you'll need some help regardless. Who are some names that might be on Texas Tech's radar as we're looking into this portal season?
Yeah, the one guy that you've got confirmed for a visit is a gentleman named Isaiah Pasha. He's from Delaware. He's a combo guard, about 6'3". He's going to visit after the dead period ends, so sometime next week. You're connected to guys like Trey Holloman from Michigan State, Donovan Atwell from UNC Greensboro, Tatum Conaway from Troy, and then True Washington from UNM. He's a guy I actually like. There's been whispers, if you're on the Trilly Discord, about Rylan Griffin from Kansas, and then Jaden Dawson from Loyola. All of these guys are kind of, I would say B+, A- ads. No real big hitter. I think Trey Holloman would be a really solid ad. All of these would be players I would want to have on our team. I think a lot of it's going to be really contingent on, you bring Darian and Toppin and Christian back and supplement with these guys, you've got a really good team. If you're looking to build your program exclusively with these guys, you've probably got some problems. So nice pieces that you'd want to in a fourth scorer or a hot guy off the bench, but maybe not guys that you want to be, playing 35 minutes a game.
Yeah, Clay, Rylan Griffin, he really struggled this year at Kansas comparatively, but just over a little year ago, he was balling out for Alabama and hitting big shots in their Elite Eight and Final Four run. And, he could be a good supplement ad, kind of like a Kerwin in a way off the bench, but with a little more off the dribble skill. He'd be an interesting name to look out for coming to Tech.
Yeah, I would love to get Griffin in Lubbock. I feel like you said it right. Like he would be the Kerwin role, but probably not as good of a shooter, but better at everything else. And I'm not gonna put much stock into his year at Kansas. I felt like a lot of players on that team underperformed. If you look at like Store, yeah, awful. I feel like their spacing was just so bad. It was hard to be good offensive player there. But yeah, what he did at Alabama, I don't know the exact stats, but he was definitely close to 40% from three on quite a few attempts a game. So that'd be for sure a guy that I want to pick up. Honestly, I could see, I wouldn't prefer it, but I could see him starting for us at the 2 if they decide to move Christian to the 1 full time.
Yeah, and then I was going to mention I was going to mention Trey Holloman's name really quickly because he's played big minutes for Tom Izzo at Michigan State. And I do like guys that play with Izzo. Like I mentioned on this show, 7 Final Fours, legendary coach, point guard for him. He could kind of fit an Elijah role in pass first point guard to kind of ease the load off of Christian. I know you're about to get into something about Christian, but that would be an interesting name to look out for in that pass first kind of Elijah replacement role.
Yeah, I like something you want to avoid, and I think we tried to do this in 2020, is you try to just recreate the exact formula that you did the year prior, and you can't just bring in a Jarrett Culver, or you can't just, you have to kind of fit with what's available. And if you try to replace Elijah Hawkins with Elijah Hawkins light and Chance McMillan light, sometimes you got to go get the best players that you can and then build your scheme and your roster and what you're doing around that. I do think I would prefer Christian to play off the ball, maybe a little bit more on ball, be in the pick and roll a little bit more, but I still think his best role is as a 2. And I hope I'll be okay with the staff deciding that they want to do that, but I think you need to construct your roster a little bit differently. If you decide that Christian's the one, you're going to need some better on-ball defenders if that's going to be the case. And I think Trey Holloman would be great. He would be the best on-ball defender you have immediately. He can get to the rim. He can score. He's athletic, and he's been coached by Izzo. He's not going to have any Grant coaching him extremely hard. He's going to be tough. He's going to know what he's doing. I think he'd be one of my favorite ads. Yeah, I'll be interested. You need to replace some shooting, though. Losing Kerwin and Chance, you definitely need to retool the three-point shooting, and I think you're always going to need that. That's something you never can have too much of.
Conrad, your favorite player, KO, Kevin Overton, seems to be back in the fold for next year. Would you like to see him compete for a starting job, or you think KO is probably best fit in that role that he was in this year, and then you want to add someone like obviously it's going to be really tough to replace Chance, but kind of a Chance-type guy to kind of be there with KO at that wing position?
I mean, a lot of it just depends on, number one, who you can get, and number two, how much KO improves this offseason, because KO had some great games this year, but at the same time, there were also some performances that were leaving you desiring a little bit more from him and what he can be, and I think he's got potential. He can absolutely keep improving, but you just have to consider what's out there. And I mean, KO coming in off the bench, I mean, I think that's a fantastic role for him. He did well at that this year, and if he's coming in off the bench, that obviously means you probably have a guy that, maybe he's not going to be Chance, but could potentially be a little bit like him and have the impact he did. So we'd like to see that, but we'll see what Grant and staff bring in.
Yeah. So Z, right now you're looking at, let's say, absolute best case scenario. Dream scenario would be Toppin and D5 both come back, but let's say best case, you get one of them back. And then do you get Federico, KO, and Christian? I mean, all, as expectation now is, so you would kind of return somewhat of a nucleus from this Elite Eight team if you were to get one of two back plus those three.
I'm all for the continuity. I think very unlikely that you return all five of those guys. I think if you want to, you can keep KO, you can keep Federico. You have the resources to do that. I think you'll keep Christian. I feel really confident in that. Darian and Toppin, I'm way less sure on. If Toppin just wants to go pro and he's done doing the college thing, there's just not much you can do about that. The rumored numbers for them, obviously I don't have any sourcing on this, but just whispers from some guys, it's going to be above a $2 million price tag for him and probably close to that for Darian. So do you want to drop almost $5 million on two players and then try to fill it out after that? Like, what does that look like? I'm not sure.
Yes.
But man, if I'm thinking about bringing Christian and Toppin and D5 back and Federico or even KO, if I'm taking those four guys, let's say no Federico, and then I'm finding some sort of other three or two, I mean, I think that's a top 15 team preseason coming back, depending on how you fill out the rest of the bench. But you bring back the Big 12 player of the year, a first team all Big 12 player, all freshman team, and then you're bringing back a really solid defense. I'd be happy with that. Let's take that and roll with it. That'd be the dream scenario.
Gosh, I wouldn't even watch football if that happened. I would just be like, get me to December. I'm ready. I don't need football. I'm ready to rock with these guys. I'm kidding.
Hey, Brennan, all I gotta say about this again is our football numbers throughout the year compared to our basketball numbers when basketball season started were drastically different. So we'll take another year to evaluate that, but that's all I got to say.
It's hard to judge, man. I mean, we started and everything's new to us, right? And it's
true.
We'll find out next basketball season when we're raising a championship banner when Toppin and D5 are back. But
I would love nothing more than to find out what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, man. I know. Well, it'll be a really interesting spring, and we're going to stay up to date on the transfer portal, but great conversation, man. That was a lot of fun. I feel like we could really have that conversation for 3 or 4 hours, but we'll keep it at what it is for now. As we close the show too, wanted to get into briefly, we'll be, spring game is now 2.5 weeks away. So we'll be getting into some spring stuff as well. We've obviously are keeping tabs on the Broadway Shuffle bracket challenge for you guys. And so we will have the results of that next week after the national championship game. And then also announcements and exciting news about what to expect this offseason. To Conrad's point, we started this in August. So we're going to be new to what we want to talk about from April to July. So be on the lookout for some interviews. Zyler's got a lot of stuff cooking up on our Big 12 opponents coming up this summer. And we're going to try to get some people on from those Big 12 schools to kind of maybe come on and debate us a little bit about their schools. Would love, Clayton, if you could reach out to your Tommy Tuberville Utah guy and get him on the show, man, that would be epic. I'd love to have some Utah banter going on the Broadway Shuffle this summer. So we'll be here
Brennan,
for all
don't you
of
know
that as
Cam
well.
Rising?
I do know Cam Rising, and I'll reach out to him.
Okay.
He's recovering from his 9th ACL surgery right now. He actually re-injured it about a week ago. So
I thought
I'll
it was
reach.
more than that, but 9th, wow.
Yeah,
During the surgery, he
during
injured
the
that
surgery,
one.
he injured the other one. Yeah, and he got hit by a Gatorade bottle, knocked him out. TBI. So we'll get to Cam Rising in a little bit too. So looking forward to bringing you guys all of that. So boys, fun conversation tonight. Is Texas Tech a basketball school? That's what you got to answer from the Broadway Shuffle, and we'll hear your answer hopefully in the comments. So hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, or follow on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you guys next time on the Broadway Shuffle. Wreck 'em.